I want to talk to Greg. Greg, who's calling in from Texas. Greg, what's going on?
Hi. So I've identified as an atheist pretty much my whole life, but
Okay.
I was just looking up ObjectivelyDan. I was looking up your name online, and I found your Twitter account, and it says that you're an Igtheist. And I thought that was interesting because I never heard that term before. So I looked it up, and I'm wondering if I'm more of an Igtheist now, just because it might describe my beliefs a little bit better. So I wanted to kind of hear more about, maybe I'm putting too much stock in just kind of a word you put on your Twitter profile, but like why you've chosen to adopt that term, and maybe kind of also hear from
Mandisa.
Like, yeah, does she identify with that term? Why or why not? Kind of what more about that term, because I learned about it today for the first time from your Twitter account.
Good. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you've talked about it. I do put it there for a reason. And it's not a word that you tend to see too often. And there's advantages to that. And it's also a reason why I put it. So there's a couple different reasons why I choose to use that word. One is the word atheist does not always have an unambiguous definition. And what I mean by that is when I was a Christian, I truly did not know the meaning of the word atheist, because everybody that ever told me about atheism were Christians trying to tell me what atheism was. And it never actually matched up to the reality of what an atheist actually believed or didn't believe. So it's not that I don't like that word. I think that word is useful. Obviously, I'm volunteering with the Atheist Community of Austin, right? But to the average person, if they're encountering that word and they're not exactly sure what you mean the first time you use it, and they're not interested in looking it up, they might have a different idea of what you actually believe or don't believe. When I use a word like agnostic, that puts the onus on them to actually look that up and see what that means, or at least what other people have described it to be. So there's a little bit of a dynamic there that I appreciate, and it's one of the reasons why I use it. The other one is just the word itself. I think the word itself it gives more explanatory power towards my thoughts on the subject of God. So agnosticism is loosely this idea that God does not have a coherent or unambiguous definition. In other words, God is an idea that has been passed around so much through humankind, through cultures and time, that when one person is talking about God and another person is talking about God, most of the time they're really not talking about the same thing at all. Okay, so like if you're talking about a unicorn, most people know what a unicorn is. Despite us knowing that unicorns don't actually exist, we have a pretty solid idea. It's usually a horse with a horn on its head. And some people will say, oh, well, what about like, rhinos and stuff? I don't know. There's some weird stuff, because there's a specific translation of one of the Bibles that says that there's unicorns in it, but really it's not talking about unicorns like you and I talk about. Anyway, that's a side tangent. So point is, even though that's not necessarily a real thing, most people know what you're talking about. But God is like, I challenge people to find a word more ambiguous than God. It maybe spiritual. Spiritual is probably up there, but like so many people have so many conceptions of God. Sometimes they mean nature. Sometimes they mean the universe. Sometimes they mean Yahweh. Sometimes they mean a multitude of gods contained into one God. That it just doesn't make sense for me to say I don't believe in God, because what am I really saying? We're used to hearing that in a Christian context, but in a worldwide context, that doesn't have the same kind of meaning. And it also, you may have some other spiritual beliefs that don't have anything to do with God, but you could still count yourself religious in one sense or another. So the agnostic label kind of mitigates that a little bit and says, I don't think that the word God is coherent in any meaningful sense unless you're really strictly defining that word. Then I don't really know what you're talking about unless you explain it to me head on. And to me, that just, I don't know. I like it. It's a little bit more unique, but also it describes my thoughts on the subject aptly. Matt Dillahunty and I have talked about this word. He's not as big of a fan of the word. That's fine. I do my own thing with it. Whatever. I've seen some more people adopt it since I've used it. So good. I'm glad if it's a word that you like, use it to describe yourself. Go for it. I don't know. Have you heard this word before, Mandisa? I'm sure you probably have.
Agnostic?
Agnostic.
Agnostic. I
Mhm.
have. I have
Or
before.
atheism,
You know,
right?
there
Atheist.
it
Yeah.
is very interesting because yes, I have heard the word agnostic before. I don't get into the war of labels or
Sure.
terms, but I do identify as an atheist. You
Yeah.
know, I do not believe in any God, spirits, or supernatural beings. That is the long and short of it. And for a while, I remember the first time I was asked if I was an atheist, and I was in high school because I was so outspoken. You know, I had such a very militant background. And so I was asked, when I asked what that term meant, I was told I didn't believe in heaven or hell. And at the time I said, well, that sounds about right, because even when I was a child, I just could not reconcile the idea of heaven and hell without evidence. And so those were things that weighed heavy on my mind, even as a kid. But I have since, learned to I've learned to accept the term, the identity of atheist, because for one, so many people make it out to be more scary than it actually is. It's only scary if you truly truly put so much value into what other people think, which to an extent, as human beings, we do. But ultimately, I encourage people to be true to themselves. If you don't believe in any God, spirits, or supernatural beings, then that means you're an atheist. Or if you reject any existing claims of a God, spirits, or any type of deity, then that means you're an atheist. And I know, especially for many Black folks, it is a term that many people are still very hesitant to use because of the stigma, because of this idea that somehow it equals devil worship, which is not the case. And I think the term atheist does compel people to do some, it should anyway, especially when you come across many of us and we don't represent what the term supposedly means, right? Like I said before, an atheist is usually defined in religious terms, but then when people come across us, they're like, wait a minute, but you don't act like what I was told an atheist was supposed to be.
Right.
So that does compel people to do more research and to perhaps have a better understanding. But also when we speak about believers, for an example, many of them are atheists towards other gods. Christians don't believe in Allah. They don't believe in Krishna. They don't believe in the other hundreds of gods that exist or have been known to exist throughout human history or throughout history. So, what makes their God more believable than the others? Meaning they're already atheists to some degree. And I would say agnosticism, the definition is, or many agnostics describe themselves as being it's saying that there's no way to know whether there is God or not, or that there's still, that right now or it's hard to prove. It's something. And I guess agnostic also sounds a little more pretty to some people. It sounds more palatable, similar to the way humanist or non-believer or skeptic or freethinker might sound a bit more palatable and pretty than atheist. But to me, atheism is a beautiful word. Atheism is a beautiful identity. It is liberating to me, and I have absolutely no problems using it. I try to just connect with people on a human level, but I do think it is important that people know where I stand. And if they have questions about it, I will I think they might be disappointed to know that it isn't as evil as people think it is.
Yeah, I like to use terms like agnostic or even theological non-cognitivist. That's another term I like to use. But like the vast majority of people just aren't going to know what that is. Most people are going to click with either agnostic or atheist. And I personally, Mandisa, I think you feel the same way. I am perfectly fine with however anybody who self-identifies with those terms wants to use it. I'm not the same when a Christian is talking about what atheists are. That's different because they don't self-identify with that. But if your definition of atheist varies slightly on some philosophical semantic level from another person's definition of atheist, that's just what it means to be a human being. Okay. The more that this movement of people is going to grow, you're inevitably going to be seeing people who use these words in slightly different ways. And yes, it's important to figure out what it means to you, but I'm also a lot more open about it than some people. I'm not going to be sorting people into categories just because, they fit what I think these words should mean. These words are always going to belong to people and should be used for the purposes of people. So whatever label you want to use for yourself, figure out what works best for you and then try it. See, have discussions. I like the agnostic label. I think it's pretty awesome. Or igtheist, alternatively as well. I hope you find some use in it too, Greg, or maybe not. Maybe you find something else. But what do you think?
So I have a little bit of a complicated thought, because whatever label works best is probably Christian theist for a lot of people. So, I've thought a lot about because if I ever want to get married, that's a Christian thing. There's just a lot of Christian things baked into society. So I've really thought about using those labels for myself, not because I believe in them, because I want whatever benefits they might provide me.
That's interesting. So you would identify yourself as a Christian theist, not because it's an accurate descriptor, but because
there might be something in it for you, or it might benefit you.
Yeah, because of the aesthetic and benefits it might provide my lifestyle.
Like what?
I guess the biggest one is marriage. I just see getting married something that would be more difficult for an atheist to do than a Christian theist.
Do you mean legally, or right. in terms, what do you mean specifically? What's stopping me getting married tomorrow? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess I agree with that. I think it's just the advantages to being a Christian theist. I think I just don't have a really good sense of what those are, and I think my temptation to believe that there are substantial advantages to that just might not be grounded in any real evidence. I mean, for me, a lot of the atheists I've met, and myself, I consider myself an atheist, just have thought about things a lot and came to pretty obvious conclusions in my mind. It's not that atheists are in some way living a lifestyle that is kind of lacking in some ways. It's almost that they just kind of thought about things more and are in some ways living a lifestyle that,
you know what, Greg, I think it sounds like to me, tell me if this is true, I think you are like me in that you've grown up in a Christian society that has conditioned you to believe that the values that Christians hold are somehow more superior than the values of other peoples, right? I think that's what it is. Because if you tell a Zoroastrian that you can only get married if you're a Christian, I think some Zoroastrians would have something to say about it, because they've been getting married longer than Christians have, right? So there's definitely a value to the aesthetic of Christianity in religious ceremonies, in what's traditionally been religious ceremonies, like marriage for Christians' sake, right? Not for world's sake, but for Christians' sake. For all kinds of stuff in life, really. The Christian way is supposed to be this superior way, and that's a result of our cultural conditioning. I grew up with that too. I grew up in Central Texas, of all places, right in the middle of the Bible Belt here. Like that was just the lifestyle that I was supposed to live. But it's a very insular way of looking at the world, and it also prevents you from seeing the beauty of other things. There are definitely people who would say that if I got married tomorrow, my marriage would be null and void because it wasn't, done before the Lord, right? But at the end of the day, that is wholly their opinion. And there is nothing they could do to actually demonstrate that to literally be the case. So tell me if that's true to your experience, Greg. Am I hitting on something there, or?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up so it was United Church of Christ, so it was kind of not that strict. There was a lot of room for thought. But yeah, I definitely do have that sense where, like, a lot of the things that I was taught were really valuable, and marriage is a good example of that, are rooted in Christian tradition.
Yes. And that's wholly not true. Marriage has been an institution long before Christianity was a thing, long before Judaism was a thing. Marriage has been around for a long, long time. And that's unfortunately a fabrication taught by Christians. And you know what? Lots of other religions say they invented marriage too. So, they're not even alone in that.
Right. I also have to throw in a thought here about perhaps who might be more benefited by a Christian marriage, whether it is a male or a male identified, or whether it's a woman. Because if you look at the tenets of Christianity, they certainly aren't favorable towards women. The women are supposed to be submissive. The women are the ones that are supposed to be, submissive to, the men and be subject to whatever, the man tells them to do, or whatever their God has, instructed for them. So certainly the question would be, who is a Christian marriage more beneficial to, rather than just in general. And the fact that there are a number of Christian marriages that still end up in divorce sort of renders that incorrect, or we can say otherwise. So whether what is supposed to be ideal for that and then what's reality are two different things. And as someone who was just became a humanist celebrant and has conducted my first wedding this year, I can tell you that marriage is more of a legal thing and not a religious thing. Like Dan said, marriage has been around since way before Christianity, and it predates religions. It is more of a sense of a cultural custom. Heck, marriage historically is more of a business transaction than anything else. So it has nothing to do, or very little to do, with this idea that you are becoming, it is a union ordained by some sort of God. Because if you look at some marital customs, they actually may tend to violate human rights. So and even in Christianity in particular. So I would just encourage you to actually reconsider that, and then actually reconsider that as a benefit, and whether it's just a benefit to you, or is it really a benefit for you and your partner and your community.
Okay, yeah, adopting the identity or label of Christian theist. Yeah, I guess I haven't seriously considered the benefits of that over atheism. It just only seemed like kind of a thought experiment I couldn't really quite get past. But yeah, I definitely agree that there's really nothing wrong with the term atheist and being an atheist. It's just, I think sometimes it's kind of weaponized and used against people who consider themselves atheists, but amongst people without those ill intentions, and definitely amongst other atheists, I think it's a fine term to use.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's been weaponized more by religious people against atheists, I would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you look at Pew Research, I've talked about this before. Pew Research has polls on their feelings of warmness, the average American's feelings of warmness towards people who identify as certain religious denominations. And, historically, people have felt about as warmly towards atheists as they have towards Muslims. Now, ask the average American how they feel about Muslims in this country. Usually it's not a positive picture. Right. A lot of people don't like Muslims in this country, and they don't like atheists either. The difference is, of course, we don't have, the people aren't going to atheist church on Sundays. Or atheists tend to not be as united in organizations There's a lot smaller and fewer far between organizations as atheists as you find with other obviously religious denominations. So it's a little more complicated and technical. But yeah, don't let the predominant Christian society bully you into thinking you can't have a marriage whatever the damn way you want to have, Greg. You fight for your own marriage, man. Do what you want with it. Don't feel like you have to adopt a Christian aesthetic because it makes it more legit. It does not, my friend. You do what you want.
Be true to yourself in that regard. Do not do not fold.
For sure. Well, I hope that helps you, Greg. I hope you like my term agnostic. It's not my term. I didn't come up with it, or atheist rather. It's a term. It is a newer term. It's like from the 20th century onwards. It's one that's been used, but I've been seeing more and more people use it for themselves. So if it works for you, that's really cool.